This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. On today's show, I'm in conversation with Daniel Rollingher. He's the general counsel for Fabrica. That's a company that's revolutionizing how we think about real estate ownership and moving it to the blockchain. The legal world and the tech world, they often seem like they're speaking different languages. But every so often, someone comes along who can bridge the gap, who can see the potential for innovation even in the most traditional industries. Think about how Blockbuster failed to adapt to streaming and Netflix came in and swooped away all their business. Or how the taxi industry was disrupted by Uber. These are examples of how tech can transform established systems. And today, the industry we're talking about disrupting is real estate. Real estate, it's an industry steeped in tradition. It involves paper contracts and deeds filed in county recorder's offices. It's an industry that, for the most part, has remained unchanged for a really long time. But what if you could buy and sell property with the click of a button? What if you could access liquidity against your land without jumping through a bunch of hoops at the bank? What if the very concept of title insurance was reimagined? That's what Daniel and the team at Fabrica are exploring. They're using blockchain technology to create a new paradigm for property ownership. It's a system where transactions are transparent, they're secure, and they're efficient. They're taking an asset class that's often seen as illiquid, and they're unlocking its potential. As we'll hear, Daniel's journey to Fabrica makes sense. He grew up in a real estate family, but his path wasn't completely a straight line. He went to law school and got his law degree, and when he got out, he's unsure of his direction. But pretty quickly, and not surprisingly, a job in real estate tech sparked his interest. He saw the potential for innovation in the space, and since then, he hasn't looked back. He worked with companies that use technology to visualize real estate opportunities via satellite images, and he also worked for a startup that helped roommates and friends buy property together. And now, at Fabrica, he's helping to build the future of real estate ownership. He and his colleagues at Fabrica are trying to make it so the transfer of an NFT, a non-fungible token, represents property, and it's all that's needed to transfer ownership on-chain. So how does that all work? How do you take a centuries-old system and bring it into the digital age? How do you ensure that on-chain transactions are legally sound? And what does the future hold for Fabrica in the world of real estate tech? Stay tuned because Daniel's going to fill us in.
Real estate was a family business. It was something that when I started at law school, I knew no matter what areas of interest I found, real estate was always going to be something that I wanted in my back pocket. I actually went to law school as a business-minded person, planned to do the joint degree JD MBA. And about halfway through, Cal made me aware that their MBA program is restricted to, they call it an executive MBA program. And I was a couple of years out of undergrad. My experience was, working at a tea shop in downtown San Francisco. And so I was halfway through law school without much of a understanding of what I was doing there. And I decided to sort of triple down on real estate. And in particular, there was a really exciting, burgeoning space of real estate tech. And so that's where I started to cut my teeth, was in the world of real estate tech.
You say it was a family business. What specifically was your family doing?
So my grandfather was a developer across the Southwest United States and in Canada. We do everything from development, land deals, mostly land, lending, that sort of stuff. The family business has diminished significantly since he passed, 20 years ago, but it was always kind of growing up a thing where I could drive down the street and point to a building and know that my family had a part in building it, and that always kind of just sparked some interest for me and some joy.
But you never worked in the family business after law school.
I spent a summer when I was 20 working for one of my grandpa's partners in Canada, doing everything from speccing out deals to meeting with brokers to running the till at one of the stores. I got to see the whole business, but never worked in the family business in law school. Law school was when I really got into real estate tech and started working for a group of different companies that were doing really anything they could to try to implement tech in the variety of real estate practices where it seems like a no-brainer it should be used.
And what specifically was an example of the implementation they were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so a really cool company I worked for my second summer of law school. I kind of had a crossroads where I was told in no uncertain terms it's time to go work for a law firm, and didn't really see a way in which that was going to be successful for me. And I met an entrepreneur. He had a company called OpSites. OpSites had this really cool product that basically leveraged Google Earth to allow interested developers or speculators to review locales, like pick a jurisdiction and see the potential developable areas across the entire county, for example.
And they could do that with a Google map. They could do that.
It was actually Google Earth back
Oh,
then.
right, right.
And yeah, it was a really cool idea. And they started figuring out how to plug in. At the time, public private partnerships were getting really big. And so there was an element of, if you can figure out how to develop this property, you can actually get some fundraising from, and get some financing from the government. And it allowed a visualization of real estate opportunities in a way that people weren't really doing it at the time. And it allowed you to, real estate is an inherently local game. One thing every company that I've worked at tries to pick away at is how to globalize this inherently local game. And if I can sit on my computer and go look at, Bloomington's development opportunities, for example, that's pretty powerful. I'm nowhere near there. I'm nowhere near Indiana, and maybe I can make some investments and make some money.
And so then I see you ultimately found or co-found a company called Home Slice. What was that all about?
So HomeSlice is another take on the implement tech in real estate. We, as Bay Area graduate students, were very aware that our rent was subsidizing massive growth in equity in real estate in the Bay Area. And the real simple idea was, why rent? Why not get your group of roommates together and go purchase a house together? HomeSlice was a platform to facilitate everything from the transaction to property management to payments to eventually a sale. Yeah, it was a really fun project to work on. It was myself and two MBA students. Learned a lot about what it means to start a company, learned a lot about what it means to fundraise. Once law school finished and the bar came up, it was kind of, I didn't have time to be a founder and study for the bar at the same time. So
What year was that? What year did you get out of law school?
2017.
2017. So then we're here to talk about Fabrica, and we'll get to the nuts and bolts of that in just a minute. But that starts around what, 2018, 2019?
Correct. Yeah. So right out of law school, I did a lot of real estate development classes at the end of law school, both at the business school and at the law school. A big part of that was alumni entrepreneurs would come through the university and just give talks. And got hooked up with a guy by the name of Nav Athwal. He started a company called Realty Shares. Realty Shares was another company effectively leveraging typical tried and true business entities to crowd fund real estate opportunities. They were specifically on the development side. And at the time, they had a DC, weren't really looking to hire. And I pretty much told them, hey, make me an intern. And if I prove my worth, keep me. If I don't, take me to the curb. I ended up creating a niche there where I was, the primary business was equity deals on the development side. So think, someone's putting 20 Surge's chickens somewhere in the Midwest. You can buy 10% of that deal and get paid out when the developer sells the product. We also had a debt arm. So it was debt financing, a lot of bridge financing. And I became the sort of head lawyer for the debt product. And that was really where I got to cut my teeth. There was an attorney working there from Fenwick who was just a total rock star, and a grinder, another Chicago guy who just kicked my butt for a year, taught me everything that I think I probably should have learned at a law firm at some point.
Was he in Chicago at the time?
He moved to the Bay Area to work for Realty Shares after doing Fenwick in Chicago for a number of years, and he went to Booth. And about a year into that, I got hooked up with the team at Fabrica. They were friends of friends with the question, hey, how do we find a real estate attorney who works in tech and is interested in this stuff? And I told them I had a great idea for how they could find one.
They approach you. Were you already into blockchain at the time?
No, I knew very little about blockchain in 2018. I had one friend in law school who in 2016 was telling me about the Ethereum presale. He was a total kooky guy, and I loved talking with him about it, and I loved walking away from that conversation laughing. And yeah, now it's been my career for the last 7 years.
And how did you go about learning it? Because obviously, if they approach you and they say, "Hey, you're interested," and you got to catch up pretty quickly, what'd you do?
For sure. I think when Fabrica approached me, what they really needed, maybe I can give a quick elevator pitch about who we are
Yeah, I
and
was
what
going
we
to say,
do.
why don't you explain what Fabrica is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fabrica is a real estate tech company. Specifically, we put real estate title on chain. At a very basic level, what that means is we create a container for every property, one container per property, and transfer the property into that container, give the ownership of the container to the token holder, and based on the entity agreement, wherever that token goes, ownership and control of the property goes with it. So back to 2018, Fabrica had the kernel of this idea, but they needed someone to come in and develop this entity agreement, basically. And so at the time, I was really still just a real estate lawyer, and the head dev was the one cranking away on the blockchain stuff. This was before anyone was really using the term NFT. We were developing before there was ERC 721 standard. We were developing NFTs.
So they come to you and they have the idea of the token, obviously, right? That's what they approach you with. And then they basically ask you, hey, how do we connect this to the real world legally so on-chain becomes real world? Is that what they ask you to do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, the question is, how do we make it defensible that when you transfer this NFT, you don't have to do anything else? We don't record anything at the county. Once the NFT is created, all transactions that happen on the real estate that are voluntary occur at the level of the token. Obviously, if you don't pay your property taxes, they'll still put a lien at the county because they haven't bought into the system yet. But anything that you want to do as the owner of that token, you have to do it through the token.
And to connect it to the real world, it's a trust. A trust is created on the property itself or on behalf of the property itself, right?
Exactly.
And was that your idea? Did you come up with the trust idea?
They had used some outside counsel to create, let's call it a V0 of a trust model. It was a revocable living trust. So think like estate planning vehicle that they decided to put the property into. I came in and sort of dug it out by the roots and started over. Now the entity that we use is a little bit more of an exotic trust model. So it's not at all related to these estate planning or testamentary trusts. These are functions of contract law. These are agreements that real property owners enter into with themselves. And effectively, they are much more flexible instruments than when you think of, for example, a revocable living trust or an irrevocable trust or what have you.
And explain how the trusts work vis-a-vis the on-chain transactions too, because you say all voluntary transactions are done on chain. But that being the case, and why do you need the trust? Explain the interplay.
At the end of the day, the almost singular purpose of the trust is to hold property and represent ownership on chain. So the trust itself, I refer to often as a signpost. You transfer property into the trust. The deed states to the world, one, that the trust exists, that it has this purpose, that it has this token specifically enumerated within the deed. And then the trust agreement, which is also publicly available and pointed to by the deed, lays out the deal. And the deal is, in a typical trust, you have a trustee and a beneficiary. That's the foundational nature of a trust. The trustee is the one who holds a legal title, and the beneficiary holds beneficial title. Often, what that means is that the trustee is the one who does things related to the trust, and the beneficiary is just supposed to enjoy the property based on the agreement. That's a broad stroke.
Typical relationship then is, like the bank is your trustee, it manages the funds, make sure you don't lose them. The beneficiary is who, enjoys the fruits, like they're getting a payout every month or whatever that is. At a high level, that's the general trustee beneficiary relationship, correct?
Exactly. We tried to maybe turn it on its head, or we tried to create a new paradigm in that relationship. And we said, listen, the trustee has one job. Anything that happens at the county, the trustee has to be the one signing their name. Everything else with respect to ownership and control of the trust is on the beneficiary. And we identify the beneficiary as whoever owns the token. In addition to having all control of the property, they also can name the trustee. And often they are themselves the trustee. So this is probably one of the major differences of our trust versus estate planning trusts, is that the trustee and the beneficiary are very often the exact same person. The whole purpose of all of this, again, is just the trust needs to be as lightweight and simple as possible. If you go to the county, you will see the trust name. If you see the trust name, you'll have access to the trust agreement. The trust agreement points to the token.
You have access to the trust agreement. Where do they find it?
So the trust agreement exists in a couple places. One is via our platform, you can always find trust agreements for any property on the property page itself. It is also pinned on chain. So in the event that Fabrica, for some reason, is no longer hosting that website, you can always find it on chain. And last, the trust agreement itself is open source. So it exists on GitHub. It can be forked. It can be manipulated and read by anyone. Anyone can go use it and experiment with it in any way that they want.
Yeah, explain that in more detail. It's open source.
My experience in real estate tech has always been that the agreement docs, those entity docs, are the sort of secret sauce of any platform or especially any law firm. If you want to go, for example, create a real estate investment vehicle with friends and family, and you go to a law firm, they're going to charge you, let's say, 50 grand to spin up those docs and get all your securities registrations in order and all that stuff. We took a step back and said, listen, if we are creating a new way to own property, it doesn't benefit us to keep it private. The whole point is anyone and everyone should be able to access all these documents. Look, they should be able to change them to fit whatever need they have. So at a point, open sourcing it became just a no-brainer. I think the secret sauce of our company is much more how we bring properties on chain, how we can guarantee the safety of our platform and the information that we project to our users and to the general public. Those are the areas that we can differentiate, and the ease for which you can, for example, load a property and borrow against it in, a matter of minutes.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
One of the features that Fabrica has is you provide safety of the information, of the data, of the ownership of all that. How is that accomplished?
So I think the number one question we get is like, hey, I showed up to your website, I see a property. If I buy this, how do I know it's mine? Why can I trust that actually gives me the property? Obviously, in the traditional world, we have a concept of title insurance. We took a slightly different route. And what we do is, one, any property that comes to our platform, we have our own process for validating ownership and ensuring that we feel comfortable about the property that comes on chain. The next thing that we do is we provide something called a token score. Token score is a set of both automated and manual checks that we make relative to the controlling wallet, the owner of the property, the title history, the on-chain history, as well as a bunch of checks related to the token itself and others. This is sort of our, let's call it V0 or V1 of how we think real estate title should be confirmed in a rational and reasonable society working on real estate. So we provide safety through our own processes internally, and then we also provide safety on the token score, excuse me. Our next step is going to be providing a guarantee on that token score so that we can say if any bad outcomes occur because there was incorrect data on our platform, you're covered.
How do you cover it? How do you guarantee that the information that is on Fabrica is correct and the person that bought that actually can buy it?
Through a warranty on the platform. And I think that the path to that is actually not as complicated as it sounds. There's definitely a history on chain of innovative insurance products that I think get undersung. And I think this is one that could be really cool. If we can provide something that doesn't replicate title insurance, because again, our goal is not to replicate title insurance. I don't think that's a system worth replicating, but is to provide a similar level of certainty to our users. I think that is a pretty endlessly valuable service. And ideally, we can stand behind the quality of our data so strongly that it's a free service that we provide.
So someone comes to you and says, "Hey, well, okay, it's on Fabrica. I bought it. It's on chain. I can see that it was transferred from that wallet to my wallet. Trust documents are now mine." But then the next question they're going to ask you is, well, what about the real world? What about someone that isn't on chain or doesn't believe in that or doesn't understand blockchain? How do I still take comfort that in outside the digital world, I'm still going to be recognized as the owner of the property I bought?
So there's a few things that go into that. One is, again, the signpost stays the same at the county no matter where the token goes. So by holding the token, you become the verifiable owner of the signpost, and you can remove the property and deed it into your name, sort of unplug from the chain at any point. In addition to that, we provide a service where any offline communication that is directed at the property, we provide a forwarding service. So all mail is sent to the token holder. It can be accessed on our platform and elsewhere. And last, I think, is just to get a little more in the weeds of your question. The legal answer to who owns the property when the token transfers is the token holder. That is clear within the trust agreement, and I think the laws of contract absolutely would benefit to the person who purchases the thing that's sold by the person who owns it, right? I think that's like a basic foundational principle. But in addition to that, the traditional world maintains property records through county recorders. There's something like 3,600 recorders across the United States. Their job is to not know who owns property. They actually don't do that, but they are to be the gatekeepers of information related to who owns the property. And another service that we provide, and something that we also leverage the token score for, is we provide automated and manual communication, including relevant paperwork, county by county dependent, on transfers that notify counties, plug into their processes to make sure that they don't have a problem with a new owner understanding what happened. And this is the state by state thing. So, for example, in Colorado, we spoke with the state attorney general who said that there's actually no requirement to notify us of these transfers of NFTs,
Oh,
versus
interesting.
in California, we spent 2 years interfacing with the California Board of Equalization, and they gave us a notice that any transfer of these NFTs should be accompanied by a form called a preliminary change of ownership, and it has to be signed by the buyer. And you send that within 3 weeks of the transfer, and then we're totally cool with it. And so every state has its own sort of flavor to it. And again, that's a part of our secret sauce, which is we help you do this the right way. Again, from a legal perspective, buying the NFT means you're the owner. If you want to go fulfill your own interaction with the county, you can do that, and I will stand by your legal ownership of that property. But if you want our help, we provide that service for free as part of our offering.
So let's talk about that for a second. So Colorado says, hey, whoever's the owner of the NFT, the state recognizes them as such, and that's all that needs to be done. But then you go to California, it sounds like you got to have an actual document that's filed with the recorder's office saying it changed hands. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. And again, you don't have to file the PCOR. You just probably are benefited by doing it.
And so I'm sure the question is coming to mind. It's coming to my mind is okay. So if the NFT changes hands on chain via Fabrica, and someone wants to do a title search or figure out who owns it, how do they get that information?
So the title search will reveal that the Fabrica Trust owns it. The deed related to the trust will point you to the trust agreement, well, and to the token. At that point, either you're sophisticated enough to review the chain,
Right.
or you want to talk with us. But either way, the title search will very quickly point to the signpost. From there, you're in the non-traditional world. You're on chain.
So I think you've already alluded to this, and now it's clicking with me. So I do the research. I figure, okay, here's a signpost. I go online. I go on chain. I find it. I identify the wallet that possesses the token. Now, I go through Fabrica to get in touch with them and say, hey, I'm interested in buying this or learning more. And you put me in touch with them. Is that how that works?
So on-chain communication, I think, is a really interesting area. And I know a lot of different projects that have tried to crack that nut from a variety of perspectives. I think the foundational answer to your question is if you're interested in buying the property, go put an offer on the property. These are ERC 1155 compliant tokens. You can put an offer on OpenSea, on Blur. You can go on to Niftyfy or MetaStreet and place a loan offer against the property. You don't ever have to come to Fabrica if you don't want to. We provide a platform that lets both crypto native and non crypto native users do all of those things in a convenient place. And we think it's the best place to do it. But you don't ever have to talk to anyone.
That's interesting. And you just alluded to it right there, the loan. Explain that. Explain how, you can list a property for sale on Fabrica, or there's other ways, as you just mentioned there. But you can also get loans against these properties. What's the mechanics there?
So let's take a quick step back. I haven't actually talked too much about the fact that Fabrica focuses on a specific real estate asset class, and that is raw and unimproved land. Why is that? In the United States, there are 100 million pieces of land. It equates to something, our CEO is going to be really mad at me if I get this number wrong. I believe the number is $5.5 trillion of an asset class. On an average year, 1 million plots of land transfer hand. So 99% of those properties stay with the owner, year over year. At the same time, getting access to liquidity against land in particular is a very traditionally underserved market. Banks are not very keen on lending against land unless it's, class AAA infill that they can get off their books quickly. So you're limited effectively to hard money lenders. Hard money lenders are a notoriously good group at making money, and they will ask for a lot of guarantees when they provide loans against unimproved land. So our hunch is that these properties are not actually as risky or illiquid as the market is treating them. We think that there is actually a decent amount of appetite for these land properties. The problem is access. Again, real estate is a local game, and if we can make it a global game, you start to see a way in which you can bring costs, especially cost of capital, down. And from the borrower side, you've been sitting on this asset. Let's say your granddad bought it 30 years ago. You're paying property taxes on it. You have no plans to develop, no ability to develop, and you really don't want someone to get a good deal off your property. You've been sitting on it forever. You know there's value in it, and you just get these low ball offers, and you don't want to get screwed. We provide a way to get easy access to capital, so unlock liquidity in that property, and in the process, the idea is that we can foster wider marketplace to improve liquidity for these properties and increase access for buyers and sellers.
And how do the terms differ from the traditional loan from a bank versus, getting an on-chain loan against your property?
So the biggest way in which these terms differ is that they are extremely simple arrangements. You put up your property token, which represents control and ownership of the property. You can either borrow directly from lenders via Niftyfy and other platforms, or you can actually leverage pools of capital that have a variety of investment strategies to set your own terms based on what LTV you're looking for. You get an automated APR, and the deal is pay your property back or it goes up to auction. MetaStreet does auctions. Niftyfy is a cleaner cut loan, pay it back or you lose your property. So these are, I would say, V1 of accessing liquidity to property. It's not currently for every property owner the way it's built today. These are for savvy and sophisticated real estate investors and on-chain users. But I think it's our beachhead to unlocking liquidity across both the immense asset class of land and other real estate asset classes and other assets.
Yeah, I was gonna say, on the site, you point out via the open source trust document that it can be applied to pretty much any asset. And if that's the case, then you can use it as collateral and borrow against kind of almost whatever your imagination brings you, right?
Absolutely. The trust is flexible. It's set up to hold any form of property. Obviously, if you're talking about, let's say, a piece of jewelry, you should understand some form of custody model because you don't want to hand someone a chunk of cash and just hope for the best.
Right. As the lender, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. As far as the entity is established, it's ready to go for any asset class. If you're trying to build a platform for something like that, you want to plug in a few more pieces, a few more bricks.
Right. Look in the crystal ball. What's the future hold for Fabrica? What are you guys working on? What's the next phase?
So, from my job perspective, some of the more exciting things that I'm working on, we mentioned the token score and some form of warranty product. I think the dream of disrupting title insurance is something that I've glommed onto since starting here. So I'm really excited about that. The more concrete expansion plans in my realm are going global. So we're talking with council and real estate owners in, at this point, at least a dozen different countries. We're currently in, I think, 23 states and expanding. So we're going across the United States, by the end of the year. And I would like to be in at least one new international jurisdiction because I think that the value proposition only grows as you leave the United States. So token insurance and expansion are probably the two main things that I'm working on. I think from a company perspective, the most exciting opportunities are in the expansion of this lending product. When you talk about 100 million plots of land, the vast majority of which have no access to capital, you start to picture a product that can bring the masses on chain in a way that very few other products can, and in a very intimate and tangible way. One of the things we're working on right now is just sending advertisements out to property owners with a QR code that allows you to go from your cell phone to review and meeting with a notary and have cash in your bank account for a loan within a handful of minutes. Well, one other interesting thing is the expansion of AI has created immense opportunity in the real estate tech world. We briefly mentioned title insurance and just as a really quick intro, if for people who don't know, the thing that title insurance does, title insurance is not an insurance product. It does not pay claims. Of the money that title insurance take in for their policies, they pay out 3% in claims. So they are not an insurance product. What they do is at the beginning of a transaction, they go in and do something called title cleaning. They check title and make sure that there are no outstanding claims. So they put the work in at the front end so that they don't have to pay anything at the back end. If you have spent any amount of time with AI, I think you're starting to see where this can go. The work of reviewing title is almost bread and butter for what AI is capable of currently. And actually, based on how we've been using it, it is way better than human review of title documents and title history. So not only are we interested in the token score, but also the ways in which we can start to onboard title history on chain in ways that I don't think has ever been possible before the proliferation of these models of late. I think the last thing, maybe I'll just make a quick pitch for is once you bring a sizable amount of real estate on chain and you have liquidity for those properties, you start to see ways in which you can build out, for example, real estate index investments against particular geographies or asset classes. You start to see ways in which maybe you could even think of developing interesting stablecoin practices or other forms of token practices.
When you say stablecoin practices, do you mean that would be part of the holding of the stablecoin, or how does the real estate piece figure into a stablecoin? Because I think most people would think it's tied. Today a stablecoin is tied to a U.S. dollar or some sort of currency.
Yeah, absolutely. So you could think of it from the perspective of a circle, for example. They, at a certain point, have a fiduciary responsibility to diversify the treasury holdings that back USDC, and real estate is a very useful treasury holding. Also, I think you could look For example, I don't think that a stable coin backed one-to-one by real estate makes sense, but you could look to coins backed by real estate one-to-one as interesting opportunities for future development and growth.
You got me thinking we were going back about, the loans against properties and stuff. But what's the future state of, let's just say, like a mechanics lien? If someone works on your house, and I know you guys focus on land and it might necessarily have a mechanics lien, but just for the sake of this conversation, someone works on your house, they don't get paid, they slap a lien on your property. How does that work in the future state on chain? I mean, is it built into smart contract and hey, before this can change hands, this lien's gonna be paid first? Like, how do you see that working out?
So in the current state, that is purpose of the token score. So we use automated processes to monitor recordings on properties on Fabrica, and in the event that a document is recorded, you could see a situation in which AI goes, reviews the document, tells us, hey, there's this lien. We reflect that in the token score. Now any person who comes to purchase a property will have access to that information. And for example, if the score drops too low, that property will no longer be able to borrow against pools on Fabrica, for example. The future state, I think, is much more interesting, which is where the mechanics lien itself, once recorded or even once reduced on chain, has its own representation on chain and could be, for example, transferred, could be leveraged itself. The opportunity is pretty limitless. We'll see if there's appetite for something like that, but I think the vision is very possible.
Interesting. This is all interesting stuff. Appreciate your time here today, Daniel. If people want to get a hold of you or learn more about Fabrica, where do you want to send them?
The platform is fabrica.land, LAND. Feel free to look me up on Twitter. I'm at notdroll. And yeah, really appreciate your time, Chad. It's been a great chat.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.